My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, does he stand by his statement that, quote, it's essential that we reduce New Zealand's vulnerability to future shocks because, as we've seen with the current recession, economic conditions can change extremely quickly, end quote? And if so, is he confident that all his infrastructure investments reduce our vulnerability to future shocks?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, yes, the government is investing billions of dollars in strengthening the national electricity grid, setting out to roll out broadband across the country, plus very heavy investments into roading and into rail. These will both increase the resilience of our economy and underpin stronger growth in the future.
Dr Russel Norman.
Supplementary. Thank you, Mr Speaker. How will the $11 billion his government is spending on new high-cost motorways do anything to reduce the vulnerability of our economy to oil price shocks?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the investment in roads is freeing up congestion, making our export productivity, lifting our export productivity. If oil prices rise, then I'm sure that people will make their choices about whether to travel more or less or whether to change their mode of transport. It's our guess that even if oil prices rise, most people will still want to travel by private car.
Joe Goodhue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, what are some of the economic benefits of the government's program of infrastructure investment?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, in the long run, it will improve the quality of our infrastructure consistent with a growing economy and help lift New Zealand's productivity. In the short term, our infrastructure investment is supporting the economy. 80% of major construction jobs, that is jobs over $5 million, are being funded by the government, according to Pacifican's recent survey of activity, and over half of all non-residential building consents are for government-related work, the highest percentage in 20 years. So the infrastructure investment is also underpinning thousands of jobs.
Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When he says that it's his guess, quote unquote, that people will change their behaviour in certain ways during an oil price shock, has the government done any studies or conducted any research into what would be the actual impact of an oil price shock on transport decision-making?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I could go and check whether the government has done. Perhaps the previous government may well have done because there was an oil price spike a few years ago. But you can see the whole transport industry has been thinking that through. So, for instance, one effect might be an even faster move to much more fuel-efficient cars or, for instance, a switch to electricity. They would still require roads to drive on.
Te oro Flavel.
Mr Speaker. Kia ora tātou. To the Minister, does he agree that the country's current measurement of economic progress, GDP, is highly susceptible to these economic shocks? And what will he do to progress the implementation of a genuine progress index, which, as a more holistic measure of economic progress, would be less susceptible to these economic shocks?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the government does accept that GDP is not a total measure of welfare or even of those things that are desirable for the government to achieve. So that's one reason why the government is now, for instance, publishing immunisation rates in the newspaper every quarter to demonstrate to the public what progress we're making with immunising children. And it's a reason why the government's introducing national standards as a measure of literacy and numeracy, because they are the basic requirements for competent citizenship.
Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In reference to the work the government may or may not have done on the impact of oil price shocks, can he confirm that oil price shocks have not been considered in any of the business cases for the roads of national significance?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I simply don't, I can't answer that question, but I'd be willing to go and find out.
Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of the fact that oil price shocks haven't been considered in any of the business cases, does he accept that an oil price shock would reduce the benefits in those business cases for building those motorways, and would also increase the construction costs. So an oil price shock would change the benefit to cost ratio by reducing the benefits and increasing the costs.
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in some respects that is fairly obvious that if the prices were different, the business case would look a bit different. But the lesson of past surges in oil prices is that while people might change to more efficient cars or different types of fuel, the private car is likely to remain a vastly dominant form of transport, no matter how much we spend on railways. And if it's not cars, then it's buses, and they still need roads.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Does he agree that there are opportunity costs in spending $11 billion on new motorway projects, in that he will have less money available to invest in projects that would give New Zealanders real options, such as better buses, trains, walking and cycling?
The Honourable Bill English.
Look, there's always opportunity costs in making a particular investment, but the investment in roads does assist with what is actually a more efficient mode of public transport than rail, and that is buses. They need basically the same system, and the member may be interested to have a look in detail at some of the cost-benefit analysis around rail, because while he thinks that roads are vulnerable to oil shocks, most rail investment cases don't stack up without a very large a very large public good element to cover the big difference between the costs and the benefits.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the light of an oil price shock, does he think that the benefit to cost ratio would look better for a new motorway project or a new rail project? And hence, if he included oil price shock in the studies of the benefit to cost for these two projects, that actually rail would look much better in the case of an oil price shock than new motorways?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I haven't personally done those calculations, but my guess is you would need a very high oil price to make the cost-benefit ratio on rail look better, because even if the oil price was high, you'd have to presume most people would shift to rail, and even if volumes on rail doubled or trebled, the economics of it are still very marginal.
Question number 2, the Honourable Annette King.